Okay, so now that we know what hurricanes are, how they form, and how they operate, let's look at how you can make yourself safe during a hurricane. You're just going to watch and listen, and at the end of this presentation, I'll give you a set of summary questions that'll give you a hint as to what you should have learned and what you're going to be responsible for when we get to the assessment. First of all, if we want to talk about hurricane safety, let's talk about and identify what causes the most damage and 90% of the deaths associated with hurricanes. That is the storm surge. Remember, hurricanes are a lot more water events than they are wind events. So let's look a little bit more closely at damage from a hurricane. Look at these houses back here behind me. This is on the coast of Florida, and they're right on the water. We're talking a couple $1 million worth of real estate right here in this picture in this spot alone. And you'll notice there's the Gulf of Mexico. That's where the hurricanes come from. And there's nothing to stop the hurricanes when they come to this point. These houses aren't high enough off the ground to be out of the storm surge. There is absolutely nothing to block the wind. So, if a hurricane comes, these houses here are going to be in really, really big trouble and probably be damaged and lost. So now that begs the question, what can you do in order to prevent or lessen damage from a hurricane and keep you from losing your multi-million dollars worth of house? So let's take a look at this house here behind me. And it is in a hurricane zone. It's right on the coast of Florida. And let's see what was done differently here that helps protect this house from hurricane damage. Now, this is part of the Gulf of Mexico here. But you'll notice what they did was that they left a row of trees, these mangroves, these plants between the house itself and the Gulf of Mexico, which is over there. And what this does is when the hurricane comes ashore and the storm surge tries to come through these trees, it kind of slows down a little bit. And slower water is a lot less likely to knock down that house than faster water. Plus, this is a really big area back there and it can soak up and hold a lot of extra storm surge water. So, one of the things that can be done to help prevent loss or damage from a hurricane, especially from the storm surge, is to leave coastal wetlands, leave plants along the shore so that that storm surge kind of slows down or gets caught up in it and therefore doesn't hit the houses. Here's another important and valuable natural defense for storm surge from a hurricane, and that's this saltwater marsh back here. A marsh is a wetland, think like a swamp that is near the coast. And what happens is every day the tide comes in and goes out, so sometimes this land is wet. When the tide comes in, it holds a lot of water. But what we've done historically is we have made this land dry. We put up walls, we add extra dirt, and we build on them because people want to be near the coast. When the storm surge comes ashore, then everything in this area then gets covered by that water. We need this land near the coast as a place for storm surge from a hurricane to come and hang out. The city of Savannah is about 8 miles that way, and these coastal marshes will soak up and hold a lot of water before it gets to Savannah and cause a problem. Well, if these coastal marshes are so important, why don't we have them? Well, it's because historically we have built on these coastal marshes. And now all around Florida, especially, is a situation where we have houses with nothing between them and the Gulf of Mexico. So when the storm surge does hit, and it's going to because you're in Florida and hurricanes are going to come ashore. They're going to come this way and they're going to go right into the houses because there is no other place for that water to go. This is my parents' vacation home that they used to have right on the coast in Florida. And you can see right here, there isn't much room there. They're right on the water. There's not much height of storm surge that wouldn't come in and cover up or destroy that house. And you'll see where it is. It's right here. And this whole neighborhood has nothing to stop storm surge water when it comes ashore. Now, sometimes it isn't just the act of the water by itself. When you get that storm surge coming ashore, it can actually move around your land. You can see here we had a bunch of dirt that was now removed when the storm surge came in and went back out. Well, if this happens over and over again, and hurricanes are an annual thing, then you're going to have problems with the land underneath your structure. And you can wind up with a situation like this. Here, it wasn't the storm surge actually hitting the house that was the problem. The storm surge was here, wasn't high enough to go into the houses, but it took the land away from underneath the houses. And that was enough to destroy the buildings when the land is removed and the houses collapse. These coastal plants, these mangroves, they help hold the land in place because all of these roots here hold on to the soil. If you've ever tried to pull a plant out of the ground, you know you get the dirt with it. Plant roots anchor the soil. So if you leave the plants in place and the storm surge comes ashore, it's got to slow down going through the mangroves in the first place. And the mangroves hold the soil so we don't lose the ground. And now we kind of know this. This is why now developments aren't built right on the coast. We know we need this area here as a place for storm surge water to go. And you notice in this picture, there's where the development was. And they left all of this land in place because we know we need that area to help protect from the storm surge of a serious storm. Now there's something else you can do. So the hurricane is going to push that storm surge this way, and it's going to push it into our buildings over here. The question becomes, how do we protect our buildings from the storm surge that would come ashore during a hurricane? Luckily, one of the most effective ways is actually natural, and that's what you see here behind me. This little mound of sand, a sand dune, happens naturally over time as sand from wind and water kind of gets piled up in these little hills. Well, these little hills act as a speed bump for storm surge. That even if the storm surge manages to get over or past this sand dune, it's not going to be as much or going as fast when it hits the buildings, and that really helps protect our structures from storm surge. So it's very important that we leave these sand dunes intact to act as a deterrent from damage due to storm surge in a hurricane. Unfortunately, what we've done in a lot of places is that we've knocked down or flattened these sand dunes and we built houses and condos and stuff as close to the water as we can get. Well, now we know better, and we know that we have to leave these sand dunes in place, or in some cases, we're actually rebuilding some of these sand dunes to act as a natural defense from storm surge, from hurricanes, or other strong storms. So now we understand how important those dunes are to keep the water from the ocean going ashore and wrecking our property like our homes during a storm or a high tide. We need to protect those. And very often you'll see signs like this at the beach say, stay out of the dunes, because the more you walk on them, the more likely you are to trample them down. And you're going to kill those plants that are growing on top of the dunes, which help hold the sand in place. So the plants help keep the dunes in place, and the dunes act as a natural barrier to protect homes and businesses inland from storm surge. You'll see this happen some places where now we know better. We're going back and rebuilding the dunes, and plants are put on there. Typically a plant called a sea oat, because they grow well in the sand. Here's an example in New York City along the coast where they're replanting the dunes, replanting the sea oats, and they've got signs there, hey, stay off these, because we need these plants to stay alive and not get trampled and help hold these dunes in place, because we now know how important they are. Well, the problem is you can't go back in history and unring the bell, so to speak. There's a lot of places, especially in Florida, where the coastal wetlands have all been paved over and the dunes were flattened. And you can see in situations like this, the condos and the buildings and the hotels, they were built right slap onto the water. And now they have absolutely no protection from the storm surge in a hurricane. So in addition to the storm surge, you do have concerns with stuff getting thrown around that then breaks your windows, because a hurricane is still a wind event. So what can you do to protect your windows? Well, first thing I want to point out is not everybody knows, because not everybody lives in a hurricane zone. This was in a hotel in Mexico, right along the Gulf of Mexico, and they actually had a sign telling tourists how dangerous hurricanes are. And you might be inclined, as if you've never seen a hurricane, let me go stand next to the window and check out this cool big storm. And they had a warning right here about staying away from the windows, because flying objects can be picked up and thrown by the hurricane, come through the window and hurt you and or kill you. So here's the first thing that most people typically do. They're going to board up their windows. They go down to Lowe's or Home Depot and they buy some sheets of plywood and they nail it to the house. Well, this works because now anything come flying through the air isn't going to hit the glass, it's going to hit the wood and it's going to bounce off. In this particular home, you can actually kind of see where the ocean is. It must be over here because they didn't cover the windows on the side of the house because the winds are likely to be coming from the ocean. Do these work? Sure, but there's some distinct disadvantages. You got to go to Home Depot and you got to buy the plywood. You got to climb up on a ladder, probably have somebody help you and nail these to your house. And then after the storm, you got to get up and you got to take them apart. Well, then what do you do with the plywood? Hopefully you can store them somewhere for the next storm. But it's kind of a labor intensive process and it's not easy to do. If you're older, might not be something you can do by yourself. Might not be something you can do by yourself at all. So yes, this works, and you'll typically see it done during hurricanes, but it's maybe not the best option. Let's look at some others. You can get what's called hurricane shutters. Now these are more permanent. These are metal folding shutters that you close when the hurricane comes, and they work, but they are expensive because they're metal doors that you're putting over every window in your house. And a lot of people in Florida don't like the way they look, even when the shutters are closed. But they do work. Here's some that you can see that are up here. That's where they roll up like a garage door. And these were actually electronic. You push a button, they run by a motor, and they come down and automatically cover up the windows. Look at this house here. They've got them on every single window. They've got them on all the sliding doors. That's a significant cost added to the house or after you have the house. So yeah, they work, but they are expensive. A little bit cheaper option is you do something like this. You can take hurricane fabric, which is Kevlar, which is the same type of fabric they put in bulletproof vests. So now if something comes flying through the air and it hits the window, it won't puncture the Kevlar, it'll bounce off. These are a little bit easier to deal with, not as big and bulky and heavy as plywood. You can roll them up and they're easier to store, easier to put up. This is my aunt's house in Fort Myers, Florida, and she has this big glass front door and a big glass window above it, and she lives in a hurricane zone. Well, what happens if the storm is going to come? She pushes a button, and this Kevlar screen comes down, and it protects her front door and windows from any flying debris. I cut off the picture, but you notice here's a handle right here. They actually have a handle that if you lose power, you can crank it by hand, and not even necessarily done by electricity. Once again, the disadvantage of these is the cost. When I was in Mexico, I did notice this company here, Hurricane Protection, and they had a little website, so let me go check it out. Well, this company is strictly or works strictly with fabric, the Kevlar fabric to cover up windows, and they will make them custom to whatever windows you have. And I saw these on a couple businesses around the area. You can make hurricane resistant windows. You can make like bulletproof glass so that if something comes flying through the air, it hits the window and it doesn't break it. This is a lot more typically done on high rises. Say like a window on the 13th floor because you can't get up there on a ladder and cover it up with hurricane fabric or nail up some boards. Now, they have to be installed when the place is built. And of course, the disadvantage of these are they are very expensive. And once they shatter, they have to be replaced. So it is a added cost, but it works in situations where it might be the only option. Now, your garage door very typically can get damaged in a hurricane because garage doors are big flat surface. They're not very strong. They're pretty lightweight, and stuff comes flying through the air and bangs up your garage door and breaks it. And garage doors are expensive. So let's take a look at Florida versus Georgia. This is my aunt's garage door in Florida. And you'll notice it has some really big, thick pieces of metal on the back side of it that are not visible here on a Georgia garage door because we don't have hurricanes here. State Farm wants you to do this. They want you to get a garage door like this because it's going to be a lot stronger in a hurricane. And therefore, after the storm, they don't have to write you a check. to replace your garage door that got broken. But remember, the number one place in your house that gets damaged by winds, like in a tornado, is the roof. And hurricanes are still a wind event, and your roof is just hanging out there and can get damaged by a hurricane. So, in a hurricane or any wind event, one of the places that is most susceptible to damage from wind is the roof of your home. And most of our homes have this kind of design. They have this big triangle shape. This is called a gable. This is a gable style roof. And what happens here is when the wind comes this way and it hits this house, especially up here up high, it has to go up. Well, that roof hangs over the edge of the house a little bit. So you have a very high wind hitting the side of the house that then goes up. It can literally peel the roof back from the top of the house. So this style of roof, this gable style of roof, is very susceptible to damage in a hurricane. So let's take a look at this roof design back here. If you notice, it doesn't have any of those big flat sides with triangles on the side of the house. All sections of the roof are angled towards the edge of the house. This is called a hip roof, and what happens here is when the wind comes along, instead of hitting the flat side of the house and lifting the roof off the house, it hits that angled side of the roof and it actually bounces up. And the force of the wind going up actually pushes down on the roof and helps keep it on the house. This style of roof, these hip roofs, are now mandatory in the state of Florida because they are much, much stronger in the winds of a hurricane. So here's some examples of hip roofs. You notice they are all angled to the edge of the house so that when the wind from the hurricane hits it, it's going to bounce up. And that's going to actually help keep the roof on the house as opposed to being peeled off. But we also need to protect our homes from the storm surge if we're close to the coast. Let's take a look here at Key West, Florida. So this right here is Solaris Hill. And if you think about our hills in our area, this isn't much of a hill because we're in Key West, and this is the highest point on the entire island, which is to say 15 feet above sea level. So when a hurricane comes, even the highest point in Key West can be underwater. In a hurricane that came through Key West in 1846, the storm surge was higher than the highest point right there, Solaris Hill. So where do you go? What do you do? Well, people were actually climbing trees and holding on because they had to get out above, higher than the storm surge. If you lived in Florida, you could leave the coast and you go inland and go up in elevation. Eventually, you'll get higher than the storm surge. But what about places like this where you're so low? Well, here's what you do. Pick up the buildings, make them higher than the expected storm surge. Notice these homes over here, they're 22 feet higher than the ground. Well, what's that tell you about the storm surge in that area? It means it could be probably up to about 20 feet. Now, how this works is when the water hits the house on the bottom, it kind of just goes around these posts because the posts are pretty thin and they don't offer up a lot of surface area for the water to push on, so the water just pushes through, and hence the house doesn't get pushed over, as opposed to a house that would have a wall there that would catch a lot of force from the water. Now these are manufactured homes, what we call mobile homes, even though they're not necessarily on wheels anymore. In my parents' neighborhood, you could tell the old ones from the new ones, because now the regulations state if you build a new house that close to the water, it's got to be raised up so that the storm surge will go through it. Well, if you have an older home, you can leave it on the ground. But if you ever replace that home, you have to put it up on, so you have to elevate it, because this home here, number one, it's a lot more likely to get destroyed in the storm surge. And number two, it actually becomes a hazard. So if I have a new home, I can't build it on the ground, because if the storm surge were to knock it over and push it into my neighbor's house, that's going to cause me damage. So once again, homes near the coast in Florida now have to follow regulations where they have to be elevated so the storm surge can go underneath it and not knock down the home. And obviously, State Farm, Allstate, insurance companies, they want that because that means the home is not destroyed in hurricanes. It's less of a check they have to write, and therefore less insurance premiums they have to charge. But if you do have an older home, there are sometimes programs where the government has assistance to allow you to pick up the old home and elevate it, because we know that that lower home is a lot more likely to be damaged and cause other people damage. So to try to be proactive, you can get grants to help raise up your old home. And it's not just mobile homes either. It can be regular, what we call a stick-built house. These are not mobile homes that would float away. These are regular houses, and they are lifted up off the ground. Think about these two, and let's talk about insurance. This one over here is elevated. This one is not. Which one's a lot more likely to be damaged during a hurricane? This one. So State Farm comes out and looks at these two homes and says, who's got to pay more insurance? It's going to be this guy, because the chances are his home is going to get hit with storm surge and be destroyed. This guy over here, the water's going to go underneath and through the house and not destroy it. Let's take a look at my parents' place on the Gulf of Mexico. I lived in a manufacturer or a mobile home community, and we looked at this already where there's not much leeway here for storm surge. I mean, there doesn't take much storm surge at all. A very small hurricane comes ashore, and the water is going to go and knock down the house. The insurance on that particular property would be a lot higher than this one, because State Farm knows that the home is a lot more likely to be destroyed. Makes it very expensive to own that home. Well, as it turns out, my parents didn't actually have insurance on that property. And they did have a hurricane where water went all the way through the house. It knocked out these windows, and the water went entirely through the house, ruined everything, ruined the floors, the walls to about 4 feet up. And the house ended up being a total loss. Now, some people don't like the look of those stilt houses, so they build their house to make it look like it's a regular solid house. But what this home has is false walls. These walls down here are fake. They're not structural, and they're meant to break when the storm surge comes ashore, and then the water just kind of moves through the house. Well, the house is still standing, and then after the storm, all you got to fix or repair are those cheaper fake walls on the outside. Now, what about the stuff that was down there in the garage? Well, sure, that stuff gets washed away, but that's your lawnmower, maybe some stuff in storage. It's not a big loss, and you could probably take that stuff upstairs before you leave when the hurricane's coming ashore. Take a look at these two houses built side by side. One of them has false walls down here at the bottom. This one does not, but they are both on elevated stilts to allow water to go underneath from the storm surge of a hurricane. And it's not just houses either, it's actual businesses that are actually built up on stilts if you're close to the coast. This over here, Shaggy's, was a long-time restaurant in the Biloxi area, and it got totally devastated by Hurricane Katrina. It was knocked down, and they came back and they rebuilt it, and they had to rebuild it elevated, because that's now code when you're that close to the ocean, so you don't get destroyed by the next storm surge. So here's a big fancy high-rise condominium or hotel right near the beach. Matter of fact, the beach is right on the other side of this building. And here's one of the ways in which they engineered these buildings to be safer from storm surge. And that is, on the bottom floor or floors, all you have is the parking garage. So when the storm surge comes ashore, it can go right through the parking garage and not knock down the building or damage any of the units. So what happens to all the cars, though, that are in the garage? Well, hopefully you know the hurricane's coming and you're going to leave. Or you park your car on the highest floor of the parking garage and be above the storm surge. In Key West, they have a parking garage. Remember, Key West is not very, very high. The whole island could be under storm surge. And this particular public garage is the place where they store all the government vehicles, all the police cars, the fire trucks, all of the city vehicles are taken to this one garage and put high enough up so they won't be destroyed in the storm surge. Now, you can build a house to be hurricane safe, just like you can build a house to be tornado safe. You put extra pilings in the ground to anchor it. You have extra bracing in the roof. You have the hurricane-proof windows. You have a lot more concrete as opposed to wood. So you can build a house to be hurricane resistant. Does it work? Let's take a look at these pictures. You'll notice this guy had a hurricane resistant home. Everything else is gone. Same thing here in Mexico Beach in Florida. All the old houses around it were just wiped out. This was a doctor actually from Atlanta who had just built this house, and it survived this really nasty hurricane. So, is it worth it? Yeah, depends. It's certainly worth the money after the hurricane. You're glad you spent it. You also save money in insurance costs. If you can prove to State Farm that you built your house to be a hurricane safe house, you're going to have to pay less insurance every month than if you have a regular home. Now, it's not just the home itself. Small hurricanes, even small amounts of storm surge that won't knock down your house, can actually be very expensive because they'll cover up your air conditioner. You should recognize these units are sitting outside your house, usually on the ground. But if those things get covered in water, they're electronic, they're mechanical, they're going to be ruined. So places that are near hurricane storm surge areas, they will typically take these and they will notice you put them on platforms beside the house so that if you have some storm surge, might not knock down the house is fine, but you don't want your air conditioner to have to be replaced because they're $15,000 each. You'll also see this with other electronic devices. This is a relay for like a telephone system. And after a storm, you want your telephones to work. You want to be able to get electricity. So those electronic switch components that can be damaged if they get covered by water are elevated. These right here are generators that will turn on and generate electricity in the event of a power outage, which is very typical during a hurricane. One of these, this one here, runs the pumps for the water supply. So after the hurricane, you still want running water. You got to have a pump to pump the water. Well, if the power lines are down, that generator will turn on and pump the water for you. But if the generator was underwater, it could be ruined. You also have these for cell phone towers. Cell phones will still work. They don't have to be plugged into the wall, but the tower has to have electricity. Well, if the tower is connected to the electrical grid by power lines, like it usually is, and the power lines are down, you lose cell phone coverage. So you have a generator right beside the cell phone tower, and it'll kick on if the power goes out. But if the generator were underwater, it's ruined. So you'll build these sensitive electronic components above the expected height of the storm surge. Now, the number one thing you should do in order to protect yourself from a hurricane is evacuate. You get the heck out of town. And any coastal area that's in a hurricane prone zone will have a plan to get people out of the path of the storm. Take Savannah, for example. Savannah is broken into 3 zones. They have an evacuation zone A, which is here in the red, closest to the water, lowest lying area. And remember, we're watching storms. We kind of know what the expected storm surge is going to be. So if it is of a certain height, we'll tell people in zone A, hey, y'all need to get away from the coast. If the storm is a little bit bigger, higher, more powerful, you can see they'll take zone B, get those people out, and finally zone C, depending upon how strong the storm is going to be. Now you can imagine the logistics with this. You're telling a couple 100,000 people, get out, leave. Could you imagine the traffic jam associated with that? Well, in Savannah, what they do is they take the interstate here, Interstate 16, and they basically make both sides of the interstate go one direction. Everybody can get out of Savannah going the same direction on either side of the road. You'll notice here's an interstate. Notice the cars are facing this way. The cars on the other side are also facing the same direction. So they shut the interstate down, and they'll have these gates on the interstate that will come down and keep anybody from going the opposite direction or going towards Savannah. Well, then when the storm's over, they turn it around. They do it the other way, and they have all the lanes going back towards Savannah to get everybody back into town after the all clear, after the storm.